Dave Schaus opened the file at his desk in Singapore, and by the third page, he already knew he was looking at fraud. The numbers didn't line up, fuel invoices padded, port fees doubled, security charges billed for guards who were never there. He was a Navy contracting officer, and this was, on paper, a routine review. He flagged it. He wrote it up. He sent it forward. He thought that was how it worked. You find the problem. You report the problem gets fixed. Within months, his position no longer existed. Not eliminated by accident. Eliminated by design. Somewhere above him, someone had made a call, and Dave Schaus, the man who did exactly what he was trained to do, was gone. Later, he would ask the only question that mattered. What else could he have done to expose this? He had done everything right. And doing everything right had cost him his career. The man Schaus had stumbled onto was Leonard Glenn Francis. 6'3", nearly 400 pounds, a Malaysian businessman who ran a ship support company called Glenn Defense Marine Asia out of Singapore. Everyone called him Fat Leonard, and for the better part of 2 decades, Fat Leonard did not just do business with the United States Navy. He owned it. Here is how it worked. The Navy's 7th Fleet moved through the Pacific constantly destroyers, cruisers, carriers, all of them needing fuel, food, tugboats, and port services in harbors from Singapore to Manila to Hong Kong. Fat Leonard's company handled that, and Fat Leonard understood something that took the Navy nearly 20 years to understand back. If you cannot buy the ship, you can buy the officer who signs for it. So he did. Not with envelopes of cash slid across a table, though there was plenty of that too. He did it with hotel suites in Manila that cost more per night than most of these officers made in a week. He did it with crates of Cuban cigars and vintage cognac carried onto ships in diplomatic pouches. He did it with prostitutes, dozens of them, flown in and paid for and photographed because Fat Leonard, methodical to the end, kept records of everything. Every gift had a purpose. Every purpose had a paper trail, even if the Navy never saw it. In exchange, officers steered ships toward the ports Fat Leonard controlled. They leaked confidential schedules so he could pre-position his invoices before a ship even arrived. They classified documents marked secret and handed them to a foreign national running a private company. Because a foreign national running a private company had made himself indispensable to their next promotion, their next posting, their next good time in port. The overbilling alone would eventually be measured in the tens of millions of dollars. But the money was never the real damage. The real damage was that an entire regional command of the United States Navy had been quietly compromised by one man with a corporate credit card and an instinct for exactly which officer, at exactly which rank, was hungry for exactly which favor, and the Navy had chances to stop it. More than chances. It had warnings, in writing, years before the arrests finally came. In 2006, a naval officer named Dave Schaus was suspicious enough to start his own inquiry. Fat Leonard found out almost immediately because he had a source inside the Navy's own investigative apparatus feeding him updates in real time and made sure Schaus was neutralized before the inquiry went anywhere. That was warning one, and it was buried before it could become a case file. By 2007, the Navy's own Inspector General had prepared a formal document. It said, in plain language, that Glenn Defense Marine Asia was grossly overcharging the United States government for port security services. It went to the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, and the trail on that document simply stops. No indictment, no task force, no headline. A senior Navy officer would later admit that everyone in the fleet knew Glenn Defense was under investigation, and everyone also knew that nothing ever came of it. That was not a rumor. That was the culture. Then came the letter. An anonymous source inside the Philippines mailed documents to the Manila field office of the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, laying out port call by port call how Fat Leonard's company had overcharged the Navy for a single visit by a container support ship. The letter asked the investigators reading it to share the same concern the writer felt, and to take swift action to stop what the writer called fraud, waste, and abuse. It was about as clear a warning as an anonymous whistleblower could put on paper. The Manila office forwarded it to the Navy's own contracting office in Singapore, the contracting office that Fat Leonard had already infiltrated. His people inside that office read the allegations, recognized exactly what they were looking at, and declared them false. The warning had traveled from an anonymous whistleblower through 2 federal investigative channels and landed directly on the desk of the men being paid to make it disappear. It disappeared. This is the part of the story where the floor is supposed to drop once. And it does, but it drops again almost immediately. Because the number of times this happened is not 1, or 2, or 5. Internal Navy investigators would later confirm that as many as 27 separate investigations into Glenn Defense Marine Asia were opened over the years. 27 times, someone inside the Navy's own system looked at the evidence and started building a case. And 27 times, that case was closed without a single person being held accountable. Not through incompetence alone. Through interference senior officers, friendly to Francis, slow-walking ethics reforms for years, delaying restrictions that could have cut off his access before they ever took effect. Ray Mabuse, who became Secretary of the Navy in 2009, would later admit publicly that his own branch had been catastrophically vulnerable, and that opening and closing 27 cases without action should have raised a warning flag somewhere along the way. He said there were people inside the Navy actively trying to shut the inquiry down, not people failing to notice the fraud, but people succeeding in protecting it. Think about what that means for a moment. This was not one corrupt officer taking bribes in isolation, easily excised once discovered. This was a self-correcting system that had been taught, methodically over 20 years, not to correct itself. Every internal check the Navy had built to catch exactly this kind of fraud encountered Fat Leonard's money before it encountered the truth, and chose the money. It finally ended in 2013, not because Navy oversight finally worked, but because federal agents outside the Navy's own chain took over the case entirely, and eventually indicted more than 30 naval officers, including 2 admirals, the first admirals in Navy history charged in a bribery case. The investigation into Glenn Defense Marine Asia would be called the worst national security breach to hit the Navy since the end of the Cold War. Francis pleaded guilty. He spent years walking prosecutors through exactly how the scheme worked before he was ultimately sentenced. And still, some of the officers he had corrupted would have their convictions dismissed years later on legal technicalities, walking free from a case that had taken federal investigators the better part of a decade to build. In November of 2024, Leonard Glenn Francis was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, ordered to pay back tens of millions of dollars to the Navy he had spent 2 decades hollowing out from the inside. He appealed. In December of 2025, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals rejected that appeal. The sentence stood. And Dave Schaus, the officer who saw the fraud first, in 2006, before almost anyone else, and reported it exactly the way he was supposed to, got nothing. No reinstatement, no apology on the record, just the quiet, permanent removal of a career, and a question he was left to ask publicly years later because no one inside the institution he served had ever bothered to answer it. What else could he have done? The Navy calls this case closed now. The sentence is final. The appeal is exhausted. But closed is not the same as understood. 27 investigations were opened and buried before a single arrest was made. A warning from an anonymous whistleblower traveled through 2 federal channels and still ended up on the desk of the men it was meant to expose. A senior officer admitted, years afterward, that people inside his own branch had actively worked to keep the truth from surfacing not once, but for the better part of 2 decades. The question this case leaves behind is not whether Fat Leonard was guilty. He confessed to that himself, in detail, under oath. The question is, how many other files like his are sitting in a drawer somewhere right now, flagged once, buried twice, waiting for the 28th investigation that never comes? I will see you in the next one.